Our December 2024 meeting, and our featured speakers today are Vanessa and Ellie from Clean Fairfax, and Jen, I think, will probably contribute as well. And they're going to be talking about a plastic-free farmers market toolkit, which I'm so excited about. And I will just let you guys have the floor. All you.
All right. Let me try to pull up our screen. All right, can everyone see that all right?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. So I will hand it off to Vanessa to get us started.
All right, thank you all. Thank you for inviting us to talk to the network today. We are Clean Fairfax. I'm Vanessa Gould. I'm a program manager. I'm here with Ellie Klugel, our Clean Streams program manager and social media manager, and also Jen Cole, our executive director. Today, we'll share with you what this whole endeavor is about, how it evolved over time, what the project goals are, and how the experience has been along the way. And as we move along, please feel free to ask questions, and we'll also have time at the end to answer questions and talk about anything that you're curious about or that we didn't cover during the presentation. I'll start by quickly introducing Clean Fairfax to anyone who isn't familiar with our organization. We are an independent 501c3 nonprofit organization that originally formed as a litter committee within Fairfax County in the late 1970s, and then incorporated as a nonprofit in 1985. We encourage environmental stewardship and urban sustainability. We work on litter prevention, recycling, and plastic pollution prevention issues through community outreach and education. And we also serve as a clearinghouse for environmental information in both Northern Virginia and beyond. So just going to jump right into it here. Clean Fairfax has a fairly long history of working to get single-use plastic bags out of farmers markets and other places. So back in 2013, Jen posted this on social media, and if you can't read that little white box, it says, "I dreamed that I won a grant to have artists make reusable produce bags for grocery stores and farmers markets and farm stands. Yes, that is what I dream about here, a world without plastic bags." So Jen worked hard on the effort to pass the statewide 5-cent plastic bag fee, and that was passed at the statewide level and then adopted in Fairfax County in 2021, and the bag tax went into effect in January 2022. So in the context of that larger effort and Fairfax County developing its own zero waste plan, Jen's thinking was that there's no more logical place to eliminate single-use plastic bags than at farmers markets that are held on county property. These bags are completely antithetical to healthy local food production. They don't belong on farms, so why are they everywhere at our beloved local markets? And just as an aside here, although we talk mainly about farmers markets, exactly the same principles obviously apply to other kinds of local art markets, craft fairs, flea markets, holiday bazaars, and anywhere that local goods are sold and people mingle in a friendly community atmosphere where we're expressing these sort of wholesome, sustainable values. Really not a place for plastic bags. Anyway, back to Clean Fairfax's work at the markets. During the 2010s, Jen lobbied for several years to table at the farmers markets, and then finally, starting in 2017, Clean Fairfax began to have a presence there. So she and Zach Huntington, who's also here, used to work at Clean Fairfax, they would give away bags at the markets, but they wouldn't see them come back into use. They did studies where they would count the number of single-use plastic bags that were used at the markets. They started a little program where they would give away week by week different color-coded reusable produce bags, but then wouldn't see people bringing them back the following week. They would ask vendors to move bags to the back, but as soon as they would leave, the vendors would just move them back to their place hanging on the tent poles. Clean Fairfax has also supported Farmers Market Week every year that we were asked, Plastic Free July, and other outreach efforts. This year in 2024, we tabled at 3 markets for Plastic Free July. We gave away reusable shopping bags, reusable produce bags, and we ran a little challenge for the month where we would give out special little punch cards that people could bring back to us to show us every time they used their reusables, and do some other things to earn prizes, special reusable fun things that we were giving away. And we did get a fair amount of interest, but we did give away several hundred bags and the punch cards, and we received back fewer than 50 cards. So after 10 plus years, we sometimes feel like we're not having that much impact on this issue, aside from creating a better relationship with the Park Authority, the market managers here in Fairfax County, and being able to compare notes as they too are sort of struggling along trying to figure out how to get these single-use plastic bags out of the markets. So this year we wrote a grant and we were funded by the Community Foundation of Northern Virginia. We started working on the Plastic Free Toolkit, which is a resource for market managers and vendors to transition away from single-use plastic at the markets. We figured that this would be valuable to share with market managers beyond Fairfax County to provide a resource more widely, even if our specific county-run markets were not able to affect this change. But basically, the reason that we can't let this go is that now that we have the plastic bag tax, our county is bringing in millions of dollars in bag tax revenue. But number one, the farmers markets are exempt from that tax. So vendors at farmers markets do not need to charge people for single-use plastic bags. They're not collecting those nickels. And second of all, with the revenue that the county's getting from the grocery stores and the drugstores and pharmacies and everywhere else, they're now subsidizing the markets giving away compostable and reusable bags to market vendors, but they're still using hundreds of thousands of single-use plastic bags at the 10 markets across Fairfax County. So there also is this dissonance that keeps bothering us and is spurring us to keep pushing to get rid of plastic bags at the front end of the problem so that we don't have to keep dealing with them on the back end. During our research for this toolkit, we were looking for examples of plastic-free markets across the country. We hunted for plastic bag ban legislation that does not exclude farmers markets, and we found a few, but they are very few and far between. And what we found was the bottom line is that certain customers, could be a fair number, in fact, do bring their own reusable bags, and they seem to be on board with this whole program of not using single-use plastic bags. But even among those diehard reusers, some of them will bring a reusable tote or basket to the market, and then they'll put umpteen individual plastic bags inside. I'm sure you guys have seen this happen. We have seen it all the time. We found a few academic studies about reusable bags at farmers markets, and they show that while people generally support bag bans and using reusable bags, it's like their good intentions just aren't enough to prevent the use of single-use bags. They need a policy in place, and they need to have no free plastic bags around. So we decided to design a toolkit to help give market managers a framework, an outline, and an approach to reducing and then finally eliminating single-use plastic bags. Just put it out there. We offer a phased approach for when a big single ban all at once might be too much too fast. And I will just say, we're going to talk about this more in depth in a minute, but compostable bags, bio bags, those green bags that can be used and then they'll break down. They're a common transition point, but they don't really solve the problem. They're just swapping out one single-use thing for another. We'll go into some caveats for those. We also wanted to share some success stories and show that this is possible. It is something that can be done, and to give people inspiration and hope and a starting point to go from. And as Jen has summed up so beautifully here, As long as single-use materials are there for people to take freely, they will continue to use them. And we will just continue to perpetuate our single-use take, make, waste problem. So on this slide, I know everyone here at VPPPN already knows most of this, but essentially at farmers markets and many other places, everyone has just gotten used to having quote unquote free plastic bags available. We all know the problems with these bags and other, other plastic products that are polluting our environment and impacting our health and impacting wildlife and just the entire planet. The reality is that single-use plastic has really come to the fore only in the last 50 years or so. So we can return to plastic-free markets. Some vendors balk and they say they're worried that customers will protest this change or won't know what to do or will turn away or not shop with them any longer if they don't have these precious plastic bags. They also see that the plastic bags are cheaper and lighter to buy and to provide to people than some of the alternatives. They've just gotten used to the shopper's habits and expectations, and they feel that to break with those expectations would prove costly to their bottom line. So this is a real fear that a lot of the vendors do have. But at the end of the day, no one is looking at the back end of this issue. Where do all the bags go? What becomes of them? And what are the real costs of providing the bags? As we know, all plastic bags have a bad end. They wind up in the landfill, the incinerator, they wind up as litter in the environment. Maybe a few are downcycled into some other plastic thing that ultimately gets landfilled, burned, or dumped in the environment. But there's all these externalized costs that market managers and vendors and customers really just don't usually think about. When the answer is very, very simple, it's just to use reusable bags and containers. We simply have to change our habits. We have to put policies in place that force that change. We have to stop taking the excuse of, oh yeah, I do have reusable bags, but I left them at home or in my car. This simply is not a good enough excuse. If people had to remember their bags because they knew that there wouldn't be any at the store or the market, guess what? They would remember them. Life has worked this way in the not so distant past, a past that is within memory of many people still alive today. And if we could survive without single-use plastic in the past, surely we can find a way to do so again, especially since the consequences of continuing business as usual are so harmful. So now I'm going to turn it over to Ellie, and she will talk to you a little more in depth about the toolkit and some of the policies and steps.
All right. Thanks, Vanessa. So yeah, that was the impetus for this toolkit. And now I'm going to walk through some of the methods and the contents of the toolkit, starting with 3 key impacts that the switch to reusables can make on a market and its larger community. So first, without single-use plastic bags, markets can notably reduce their waste generation, and simultaneously they reinforce their commitment to environmental responsibility, which is a great thing. Second, this switch can help invigorate or reinvigorate the local circular economy, because by spending your consumer dollars at the market, supporting local food vendors and food sources, you really help cement these as a provider of these services in your community for years and years to come. And so more of that money stays local, and in a sense, it goes a lot further than it may go at a few grocery chains scattered throughout a community. And finally, you may find that switching to reusables may further deepen the sense of community and connection at the farmers market, whether that be through simple customer-vendor exchanges at checkout, refills of favorite products, or even the return of materials like berry containers, jars, and baskets. Reusables give a common goal that both vendors and customers can contribute to. And as this quote so perfectly captures it, people do not come to the markets because of the plastic bags, and they won't stop coming if they aren't there. And we can't talk about plastic bags without addressing the new wave of bioplastic, as Vanessa just mentioned, that's being pushed to replace all of our typical petrochemical plastic products. So to preface this, the best alternative to single-use anything is a reusable. But there are instances when a single-use item makes sense, or honestly, it's the very convenient option. And in those cases, there are certain products that are better than others. So pollution and climate change have really spurred efforts to make plant-based, degradable, and compostable plastic alternatives in recent years and push those to market. And it's true, these offer a pretty seemingly attractive swap. They serve the same purpose, and they can represent a great first step towards eliminating plastic. So that's why we do include them in the toolkit as a transition option while phasing out all of plastic at the farmers market. However, as we've kind of alluded to, they're still a single-use item, and they fall apart faster than plastic in some cases, and that's by design. So they're really an imperfect solution. And there are a couple of concerns with compostable products, including the ability to achieve composting conditions, access to local commercial composting, and there is a lot of greenwashing involved in the marketing of these products. There are lookalikes and literally green-colored products out there meant to confuse customers. So let me draw attention to the red arrow on this screen, the top picture. This is a green-colored bag that we got at a farmer's market this summer. And the fine print here is a little hard to read, and it also doesn't really make sense syntax-wise, but it says, quote, 49.28% biodegradation in 900 days under non-typical conditions. So what does that really even mean? That after 3 years in special conditions, half of this material in the bag might break down? And there's another example at the bottom of the page. This is actually a compostable bag. It's BPI certified. But again, there's some fine print. It's only commercially compostable, which means you can't throw it in your backyard and expect it to break down. So handing out these types of bags at a market without customer education or without existing composting services available means they'll likely end up in the landfill anyways, where they will release methane as they break down. And that doesn't really solve our issue. So the main takeaway is, with proper education and facilities, composting services available, compostable bags might be a potential or temporary alternative on the road to eliminating single-use plastic, but it is definitely not a silver bullet solution. So this slide breaks down compostable and some of the other marketing buzzwords that we see today. And here we can see compostable is the highest order of the category. It's the smallest bubble in this diagram. Yet, as we mentioned, just because something is labeled compostable, it's not a blanket assurance of actual realistic compostability. So walking through this diagram, we start at the broadest category, which is degradable. And that defines a product that can be broken up either biologically or chemically over time. And honestly, with enough time, all materials will degrade into smaller and smaller pieces, even mountains. So this doesn't really mean much. The next tier, we have biodegradable. That's a product that can be broken down biologically by living organisms like bacteria, fungi, and microbes. But it may take years or decades to do so. And the resulting products, they're usually reabsorbed by the environment, but they may leave behind harmful toxins and microplastics. And finally, the smallest subcategory is compostable. So this means a product that can be broken down biologically, but at a faster rate. And it's broken into natural elements. So water, carbon dioxide, inorganic compounds, and organic biomass. But it's a good thing they don't leave behind toxic residues and harm the environment. Now, there are certain third-party certifications like ASTM and BPI, which can help consumers understand the conditions and the timelines of items that are labeled compostable. But again, the moral of the story is it's intentionally complicated. You really have to read the fine print to understand what that product is promising to do and then how it will actually perform. Okay, so now that we have some of that context, I want to dive a little into the content of the toolkit. Here are the 5 steps that we designed to help markets phase out single-use plastic. First, evaluate. Ask yourself if your market really needs plastic to function. The answer is probably no. And also consider what's the added cost of plastic bags to your vendors' bottom lines or to your market's operation. And what are the environmental costs and the monetary costs of plastic bag pollution in your region? Second, create new policies. And these can be incremental changes, such as moving bags behind the counter, not hanging them from tent poles, or maybe it's the temporary use of compostables. But the ultimate policy that we're working towards is prohibiting all single-use plastic shopping bags from the market. The third step is to communicate with your vendors. Be open and timely, transparent, and give ample notice of policy changes. Also, it's very important to allow space for input and questions. You really want to work with your vendors, not against them. The fourth step is to consider adding any additional changes or best practices and introducing those to your market. This might be bulk buying opportunities for plastic alternatives. It might be adding compost education or maybe compost collection at your market. Reusable containers next to bags, or maybe it's a bag lending library, like some of these images on the right side. And finally, the last step is to communicate these changes with your customers. You want to get the word out in multiple ways and as far in advance as possible. Focus not on the restrictive nature of the new policies, but try to explain the importance of the market's changes and their role in fighting plastic pollution. So really sell the benefits here. So our toolkit also provides readers some guidance to help them implement these changes, and that includes some example policies and timelines. These primarily fall into two categories. We have one-time policy changes, and then we also have a phased approach, which we've referenced a couple times already. The one-time policy changes are exactly what they sound like. They are simple or single changes that eliminate plastic bags all at once. These might be most effective at standalone or smaller markets, or maybe in environments where plastic-free policies like bag bans or bills already exist. The phased approach is probably more applicable for most markets today, as it's stepwise and very scalable. So especially for large markets with several locations, smaller changes over the course of 2 to 3 seasons might be more manageable and palatable to vendors and customers. So this might look like a transition or a grace period before the full force of a policy takes effect. Or maybe it's subsidizing reusable bags for 1 season before a full ban goes into effect. Also in our research, we came across several examples of farmers markets that had successfully employed some plastic-free changes. So I've listed them up here, and some of the common themes at all of these markets include a phased approach, removing bags over a few seasons, as I just mentioned, as well as pretty good conditions for plastic-free policies. So a lot of these cities or localities had bag bans or bag taxes, or even full plastic bans in their area. And admittedly, this is a pretty big factor towards these markets' success. And in speaking with each of these markets, all of them also emphasize the importance of that constant open communication with vendors. If you're interested in any more information on these 4 successful markets, you can explore them on our Toolkit webpage on litterfreeva.org. But the big takeaway from this slide is that plastic-free is doable. It's happened all across the country in several different regions, different types of states. So it can definitely happen here in Virginia too. We searched for examples of bag ban legislation that required farmers markets to participate, and they existed, but again, they were very few and far between. For some reason, most places with bag bans treat farmers markets differently and more leniently than grocery stores, but they really don't need this special treatment. So we've listed some of the places across the country that do not carve out farmers markets from their bag bills, and I've even included a little snippet from the city of Philadelphia's legislation on the right-hand side. And I'll also mention that Hawaii previously had a bag ban, and it did include farmers markets in it, but it got diluted during the pandemic, and it hasn't been restored. Also, Anne Arundel County, Maryland has a bring your own bag bill, but we've not been able to get any response to whether or not that includes farmers markets or if that bill has passed yet. So as with most other environmental and plastic policies, it's very important to understand the policy landscape that we're working in. It's also important to know if you're working in a Dillon rule state like Virginia, where things have to go through the state legislature before they can even be adopted by localities. So the reality is this sets the stage for how simple or complicated it might be to phase out plastic in your community. And as Vanessa mentioned earlier, we have a strengthening partnership with the Fairfax County Park Authority's Farmers Market Coordinators. And FCPA operates 10 markets in Fairfax County, and they're working really hard towards eliminating single-use plastic bags there. And we've helped consult with them on a phased multi-year approach. Vanessa kind of alluded to it before, but one fun element of this collaboration was our programming for Plastic Free July this year, where we shared information, hosted a reusables challenge for customers. And this experience on the ground at the markets in July really helped elucidate some of those challenges to getting bags out of a market system that's as large as Fairfax County's. There are some murky bureaucratic circumstances. We're still trying to figure out where the authority lies to make policy changes at the market. And there's also vendor relationships and pushback to consider. But that being said, there are some great changes that FCPA has already made in their plastic-free journey, including providing compostable bags to vendors, giving away reusable bags and produce bags to customers, requiring bags to be behind the counter, not hanging from tent poles, and putting shopping baskets at all of the produce vendors. And so now I'll hand it over to Jen to talk a little bit more about this relationship and a panel she presented on last month at the Mid-Atlantic Farmers Market Association conference.
Thanks, Ellie. So we were really excited to roll out the toolkit at the Mid-Atlantic Farmers Market annual conference back in November. And I'm going to apologize in advance for my voice. I have a really bad cold, and I'm all hopped up on cough medicine, so I don't cough, but now my voice is just really scratchy, so I hope you can hear me. So we did it panel style with me representing Clean Fairfax, our colleagues at the farmers market here in Fairfax County, the market coordinators, and one of the vendors who primarily sells berries and small fruits, who has actually cut down her distribution of plastic bags considerably, both at the farmers market and at their own farm stand. And I started out by talking about my lived experience as a person who does a lot of my grocery shopping at farmers markets and farm stands, probably more than the average person, because I wanted to make sure that it wasn't just me coming in as an environmentalist saying, you need to do this because it's good for the environment, but that I was actually like on their side here. And I also mentioned that I had been a member of 2 different CSAs, Community Sustained Agriculture, for over 6 years, but that I didn't renew because so much of the produce would come in a box, which I would turn in the box every week, but then all of the produce was packed in plastic bags. And so even when I would gift free reusable bags to the farm CSA and say, you can use these for everybody, let's try a pilot project, the farmers were just like, that's too much work for us. And so we would just not renew. And each one of those CSAs was over $800 a summer. So that was funding that they lost out on from me. So it is important that when you hear that vendors and market managers are convinced that no one will sell or shop for carrots or beets or blueberries or tomatoes or whatever, if there are no free plastic bags hanging from the corners of the tents, that the inverse is also true. People like me will not buy from markets that are overwhelmingly wasteful, and I spend a lot of money at markets. And during my talk at the panel, I was the first one up. I used an example of a farmer's market in Northern Virginia that, in fact, the only one in Northern Virginia that had managed to become plastic free. And it was even plastic free during COVID, which was crazy. And when I say plastic free, I hope everyone understands that I'm talking about those hanging white bags on every tent corner. So even though that farmers market was really far from us by Northern Virginia standards, we would go to it every Saturday. But when that market manager retired, the vendors all brought their plastic bags back out because there was no actual policy about no plastic bags. It was merely that market manager who had talked the vendors into doing it. And when he was gone, they didn't care. So now we don't go to that farmer's market and spend money anymore. So I also talked about the health effects of plastic and about how the US has the highest concentration of microplastics in drinking water than any other country in the world. And what a crazy disconnect it is that people go to the farmer's market, not just to get safe and healthy food for their families, but also to support local agriculture. And then it is put into literally hundreds of thousands of plastic bags. And while I definitely, my part of the panel had the light tone of scolding, because that is my way. It really is important for vendors and markets to understand their active role in being part of the problem instead of being part of the solution. And here's the thing. There's one universal truth here. No matter who you are, there's one thing that everyone needs for this to work, and that is for someone else to make the policy and for everyone else to follow it. Vendors need to be able to deflect any blame that they believe they're going to get from the customers, and market coordinators need to be able to do the same with the vendors. I mean, they basically need to be able to just say, I had nothing to do with it. It was a decision from on high. And I don't care about that. I don't care that no one wants to cop to making the decision. I just want the decision made. But here's the thing that I reminded all of the farmers market coordinators and the few farmers that were in our panel. Farmers markets have all kinds of policies about what happens at farmers markets, what can and can't be sold, whether dogs are allowed or not, requirements for food safe hot food, whether there are food trucks or musicians, whether nonprofits can table, whether politicians can pass out flyers, what time setup and breakdown is, where you can park and not park, how close your farm has to be considered a vendor. I mean, there is a list of rules. So there are a lot of rules. Why is it so hard to make this rule? And there was like a light bulb moment. And before I handed the mic over to my colleague at the farmers market, the Fairfax County Farmers Market, I reminded folks in the room something that Vanessa mentioned early, and that is that plastic bags are not free. They cost something. They cost cash on the front end to the vendor who has to buy them. And there's a cost on the back end in health and environmental issues, and offering reusable bags and charging for them, just like you would if you had other value-added items at your market, like eggs or yogurt or pasta, benefits everyone. And that customers are used to using their own bags at the grocery store, and many of them are used to bringing things back, like glass dairy bottles. Like, that's a huge thing. Our market colleagues who spoke after me agreed that plastic bags have no place in the market, but echoed that what they need is cover. They need someone else to make that decision, that policy change. And here's the thing. It is easy for us to stand up in front of anyone and say, get rid of plastic bags, and wag our fingers, because we don't use them. And we know the damage they inflict, full stop. Like we're so over plastic bags that it's hard for us to find any good reason for them. We don't use them at the grocery store. We don't use them at the farmers markets, because it really is that easy to just use your own bags. You just have to want to or be forced to. Those are their choices. And we're not so delusional to suggest that if people stop using plastic bags at the farmers markets, it will solve the plastic pollution crisis. Because those of us who have been working in this space on the front and the back ends for the last 1 billion years will tell you that it is corporations who need to be held accountable first and foremost. But when you are leading by example, it makes it a lot easier to call up your elected official and say, I'd like you to support this legislation. Here are the things we have done to support a plastic-free initiative in our community. And when your vendors and customers are plastic-free, then they become advocates too. And so that is what I ended my piece of the panel on. We didn't have a lot of questions. There didn't seem to be a huge appetite for plastic free because there's no policy. Like no one is willing to make anybody mad. However, in discussing this with the director of the Virginia Farm Market Association, she suggested that we work together on a statewide initiative to put farmers markets into the bag legislation, or create another piece of legislation that would ban plastic bags at farmers markets. So that is something that I think we're probably going to work on in the next couple of years if we cannot get localities and farmers market coordinators to just say, hey, let's no more plastic bags. Because it seems like all the good intentions in the world is not giving us fewer plastic bags. We actually need more sticks and fewer carrots. Okay, so the next slide here is the front page of our plastic free toolkit, which you can find on our sister site, which is Litter Free Virginia, litterfreeva.org. And you can look at all of the information that's on it. It's all free. There's like all kinds of information. We're continuing to add to it as well. Welcome some feedback if you think that there's something missing from it. You can download the complete toolkit. There's also a one-pager as a PDF, which is in English and in Spanish. And we hope that that's really helpful. We would love to hear about whether or not you're able to talk your farmer's market into going plastic bag free. And one of the things that we got a little bit of pushback in is, well, where are you going to stop with plastic? And I'm like, with plastic bags, because plastic containers are not really single use. If you get, pimento cheese from your dairy vendor, that container that the cheese is in is reusable. That is not a single-use container. So, I mean, we're really just trying to get single-use plastic out of the market, because we just don't want to see it in the stream instead. And so that is our presentation on the plastic-free toolkit for farmers markets, and we will entertain any questions you may have.